Thank you. And thank you, Robert, for keeping everyone awake. Good news. So I'm going to go right into brain spotting. So I have a question for all of you. How many, by a show of hands, how many of you have heard about brain spotting? Okay, just a few. Cool. So what we're going to do is a very, very quick overview of what brain spotting is. And the reason I'm so passionate about brain spotting is because it's another modality of nervous system regulation. And for all folks who are dealing with addictive compulsive behaviors, as I spoke about earlier, nervous system regulation is necessary for sustainable recovery. Okay, let me just say a few things. I don't believe that addictive compulsive behaviors and trauma are can be separate. They're inseparable 99% of the time. I shy away from anything pathologizing or stigmatizing, so I try not to use any pathologizing language. Before I became a somatically trained therapist, I ran into a lot of walls, and so I'm really grateful for brain spotting and somatic experiencing. As I said before, I'm a clinician. I'm not an academic or a researcher. I also believe as much as we know today in 2024, we really don't know. I have a lot of humility to how much we've learned in the last 30 years, and 30 years from now, we're going to be having a much different conversation. And as we say in the 12-step rooms, take what you like and leave the rest. I'm going to go right to my brain spotting. Okay, so as a somatic experiencing practitioner, I studied somatic experiencing for 3 years, full-time program, and it was great. It was foundational for my understanding of the nervous system. It was very creative, but I didn't really know how to make it applicable to my clients. And what brain spotting does is it's a sequence that I'm going to go over with you today that is very easy to understand. And it uses the principles of somatic experiencing and a lot of somatic work that is done out there. But it has a particular model and frame that is, for me, sequential and user-friendly. Now, for those of you who have never heard of brain spotting, excuse me, David Grand was the founder of Brain Spotting. He was a psychoanalyst in New York City in the 80s, and he became one of the first EMDR specialists in the early 90s with Francine Shapiro. And then in 2003, he had a breakthrough with one of his clients that distinguished EMDR from brain spotting. Now, I'm not a competitive kind of guy most of the time. All somatic modalities can be helpful. So EMDR and brain spotting can both be helpful. It's not one or the other. It just depends on the client. So nowadays, brain spotting is found in 52 different countries around the world. We have more than 13,000 brain spotting therapists around the world. And this is only 21 years old. So it's really caught on like wildfire. So the tagline of Brainspotting, if you go to the brainspotting.com website, and I'm not promoting or I'm not getting paid for this presentation in any way, just to share the disclaimer. Um, this is a tagline that we use, and you can see it on the Brainspotting website. Where you look affects how you feel. So the angle of your vision, the position of your eyes, and we're going to talk more about this, is really what we're talking about. Now, if you see this young girl, you might think, oh, she's just daydreaming, right? She's just looking off into the distance, and she might be daydreaming. That's a possibility. But the angle of her eyes are probably an angle that her eyes landed on, that the angle was something that she found either resourcing, pleasant, or possibly difficult or challenging based on something from her past. I believe she looks pretty calm. So I'm going to say that she's in a resource state. But we're going to talk more about how our eyes are really the window to the nervous system. Okay, the eyes are the window to the nervous system. So this is the story of how David founded BrainSpotting. He was working with a client for about a year. Sorry. For about a year, and he was working with EMDR for all that time. Now I have my pointer with you just to demonstrate a little bit what I'm talking about. So with EMDR, it's bilateral movement. So it's back and forth, back and forth. It might be a light, um, strobe that goes back and forth, but it's bilateral. What happened was he was working with this young figure skater, and he slowed it down just because he noticed something happening in her body. And he slowed it down and he said to her, would it be okay if we just stayed at this particular spot because I'm seeing something that's different from when we were doing pure EMDR. So what happened was he stayed at that spot, we call that a brain spot, where she was processing. And what was happening was the temperature in her body was changing. She was having involuntary movements where her leg couldn't stop tapping. She was having all kinds of release. She was tearful. So this is a very dramatic example of discharge, what we call discharge or release. Sorry about that. Um, and so he stayed at that one spot, which we're going to talk about more in a few minutes. But I gave it all away. So anyway, she had a lot of release at that one particular spot. And he said, go to the rink tomorrow. She practiced every day because she was an Olympic um, aspiring skater. And what happened was she talked to him the next morning and she said, I couldn't miss the triple loop. That was always her nemesis. She couldn't hit the triple loop, and then she couldn't miss it. So something happened in her body that released childhood trauma, unprocessed memories, etc. And I know it sometimes when I say this out loud, it sounds a little magical. It sounds a little like mysterious, but the body stores memories. Like we talked about earlier, the body remembers. And she had a lot of childhood trauma and a lot of injuries in her body that needed to be released. So she performed a flawless triple loop, and the story goes that she couldn't miss it after that point. By the way, David Grand works a lot with athletes and top performers and entertainers. That's his subspecialty. And he wrote a really easy, user-friendly book called Brain Spotting. So if you're interested, it's a great little user-friendly book for you or your clients. What I like about brain spotting is that it goes with any existing theoretical orientation. So if you come from a CBT background, if you come from an IFS background, if you come from a psychodynamic or psychoanalytic background, brain spotting layers on top of it, which is really great because anybody can come to a brain spotting training and learn strategies, techniques, sequence to be an addition to their practice. So a brain spot in simple terms is where the eyes choose to go. Where the eyes choose to go, like the girl that looked like she was daydreaming, that was a brain spot. Now, when I'm in session with a client, there's many different brain spots in the room. There's not just one brain spot that we have to find. There's some spots that are more resourcing or more pleasant and calm. There's some that are more activating and challenging for people. And oftentimes we're looking for the brain spot that's more activating because we really want to help somebody release the stored memories as best we can. And by the way, when I see clients and talk about brain spotting with them, and I said this a little bit earlier, the neocortex is our thinking brain where we live most of the time. The subcortex is where stored memories exist. And so we're really focusing on the subcortical system and taking one memory off the shelf at a time. As I said earlier, relational and neurobiological attunement is part of the brain spotting frame. I love this. The client is like the head of the comet, and the therapist is like the tail of the comet. I never, ever go faster than the client. The client leads me. We're collaborative. I'm giving them full permission to do whatever their nervous system is telling us to do. And it's my job to really listen to what their nervous system is saying. So if they want to go if they want to focus on a fight they had with their spouse yesterday, or they want to focus on bullying from when they were in fifth grade, wherever they want to go, we start there. Some of you may know about the window of tolerance. Dan Siegel at UCLA developed the window of tolerance. I show this slide to every single client, whether they're a brain spotting client or a talk therapy client, because this is an adapted version called the window of resilience, back to resilience again. And in between the two dotted lines is where we feel most like ourselves, resourceful, resilient, and regulated. If we upregulate, we often get rageful, panicky, hypervigilant, etc. If we downregulate, we get disconnected or depressed or shut down or dissociative. And my job is to help clients know when they're regulated and dysregulated, but also to help them with tools that they can take home with them so that they can feel more regulated more of the time. And it is a practice. All of this is a practice. So this is the brain spotting sequence, okay? And I'm going to make believe that I have a client who came in who has been maybe in addiction recovery for a year. That's kind of a typical client that I see. And they've come to me because they want to work on some kind of trauma or brokenheartedness. So with this particular client I'm going to talk about, they came in and they talked to me about how they ended up losing their family over their addiction. They're divorced, they lost custody of their kids, and they really have a lot of sorrow, a lot of grief around all of that. So I asked them, what would you like to work on today? Simple question. And they get to choose, and they say, I just can't tell you how heavy this feels that I lost my family and my kids. And I say, well, tell me more about that, right? I just want to be curious and non-judgmental, of course. And so they talk maybe for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever they need to talk about. And all the while that they're talking, I'm actually observing them for involuntary movements, right? It could be a change in blinking pattern. It could be a change in swallowing pattern. It could be um, I'm watching their eyes. Are they going over here? Are they going down there? I'm looking for anything involuntary that they're just doing as they're talking about their story. And that's the interesting part, that as a brain spotter for several years now, I'm like a detective, right? I'm always looking for what is it that they're telling me through their body without even knowing it. So that's where we start. Um, then I asked the client, from 0 to 10, how activating is this now? It's called a SUD scale. I forget what it stands for, but it's the distress scale, basically. And generally people say maybe a 5 or a 7 or even a 4. It's really just to get a relative sense of how activated they're feeling in their body. And we start there, and I say, okay, we're going to look for a brain spot now. Now, most of the time, because I've been doing this a while, they've already given me a lot of clues about where their brain spot is. So I'm going to just make it up that they were looking maybe down here while we were talking about their sorrow, about their grief. And I might ask them, instead of them having to find it, I might say, I noticed your eyes were going in this direction. Did you notice that? Sometimes they realize that they've been doing that. Sometimes they don't. But I'll say, let's just see if we can isolate the spot. So I'll move the pointer a little further in one direction and then back and then up and then down. And we'll just see where do they feel most activated. And that becomes the brain spot. So we might end up here, and this will be our place for the rest of the session, actually. Okay, and all they're doing is looking at the pointer. All they're doing, then I say to them, while you're looking at the pointer, notice what's happening internally, thoughts, feelings, sensations, thank you, images, memories, and they report. And I say this can be as quiet as you want, or this can be as verbal as you want. No right or wrong. Most people have a quieter experience with brain spotting. Some people like to talk a lot. No right or wrong. I just want to hopefully see that they're processing from a subcortical position. And usually I can tell that if there's involuntary movements happening. So before the session winds down, I ask for an activation level, and they say it's now at a 2. That's a good sign because the activation was a 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever, and we're hopefully going to get a lower activation level at the end. Not always the case, but that's what we do. And then I ask for a body scan from head to toe in your body, what's feeling pleasant, what's still feeling activated. And we just check in. And I say to them, what was that like for you? Was there anything you would have liked differently? And then I use essential oils. I'm not going to get into that whole thing today, but I think essential oils are a wonderful ritual to end the session and to help people transition out of the office. And then I say, of course, you can call me in between sessions if something unusual comes up. Usually I say that the brain doesn't know that we've ended our session. So for the next day or two, you may continue processing and just notice if anything unmanageable comes up, and you can give me a call or we can talk about that. All right, so we want to build awareness of regulation versus dysregulation. We want to build somatic awareness. We want to build capacity to return to that regulated state more efficiently, and building more range for all of your internal world. And people often say, I just feel like I have a bigger perspective. I'm not carrying it as heavy as I was when I walked in. I'm feeling more perspective. I'm feeling lighter. Those are the kind of the most frequent responses to brain spotting. So addictive compulsive behavior in general is a misfired attempt to regulate the nervous system. It's a survival strategy, but it doesn't work, of course, after a while. Compulsive behaviors are an attempt to feel either better, less, or sometimes more. Of course, I'm looking for underlying themes. I don't generally work with people active in their addiction. I work with folks who know that they're carrying a lot of shame, that know that they're still depressed, that they want to work on their grief. These are all the kinds of things that we work on together. I'm not going to go over this entire slide, but I like looking at the contrast because relational attunement is talk therapy's cornerstone, but relational and neurobiological attunement is what brain spotting is about. Neocortical is more talk therapy, subcortical is more brain spotting, more talk, less talk. Brain spotting generally is shorter term, of course, nervous system oriented, and involves a lot of somatic awareness. And not all my clients come in even knowing that they have a body. Like a lot of the men I work with are kind of talking heads. So I really need to help them get in touch with their body even before they can do a brain spotting session. And brain spotting, by the way, is always about timing. I don't just launch into it with anyone. We talk about it, we educate them about it. I have them look at the website. They may even read the book before we have our session because I want their nervous system to be prepared. And as before, this is how you can reach me. westsidetherapist.com is my website. And I guess I'll be taking some questions.
Thank you.